Good morning. Today we are looking at Chapter 5 of All Quiet. You may be relieved to know that after all of the intensity of Chapter 4, that Chapter 5 is a little bit more relaxed, with the exception that the villain does come onto the front lines. So in Chapter 5, it's broken into a couple of different sections. The first section that you're going to see is the guys relaxing back at base camp. The very beginning of it uses the term louse. We typically don't see the word louse by itself, as in you have one mouse and 3 mice. In this case, you have one louse and hundreds of lice. So that's what Hibestus is cracking right now. So we look at the guys just relaxing. They're all laying on the ground. They're just having a good time. And then Mueller, who loves school the most, Mueller says, "Albert, what would you do if it were suddenly peacetime again?" This leads into a conversation in which you see all of the guys' different personalities, because Albert, being the most pessimistic of all of the guys, is quickest to say, the war's never going to end, because he is a glass half empty kind of guy. Then he goes person by person. A couple of answers will surprise you. Hibestus, who is not known for his intellect, will surprise you. His first answer is funny, like really funny and incredibly inappropriate. And then his second answer shows very much what he wants most out of the world. And you can see that. Past that point, in the middle of that conversation, Himmelstas walks up to them as they're just talking, laying on the ground. When Himmelstas comes up, the guys not only do not stand up, but they have lots of other reactions. John's is going to be the most pronounced because he was the one who was personally humiliated by the guy. If you don't get exactly what's happening, ventilating his backside would mean exposing it to air. So that's going to be quite an amusing scene for you. But as soon as that happens, Mueller, Kropp, and Paul go back to having the conversation of, well, what would you do? Their conversation is a little bit more serious. Paul's answer is one that he wishes that he could tuck back in after he says it, because he does not think that any of the other guys are going to get it. You're going to look at a lot of loss of innocence and condemnation of warfare inside of this chapter. It's going to be very pronounced. After this moment, you are going to see Paul and Kat go away, and they're going to go find those geese that they mentioned at the very beginning of Chapter 4. Kat says, "I know exactly where they are, I have their number," and Paul and Kat go and get them. Now, the geese may perhaps belong to a regimental headquarters, which means that they are going to be permanently borrowing the geese from their commanding officers. There is a dog involved. You'll see that. At the very end of the chapter, a very serious conversation has, and the conversation is entirely inside of Paul's mind, and Paul tries very desperately to describe the relationship that he has with Kat. Now, I'm going to full out say that I've had kids who have not understood this scene at all, and when Paul straight out says the words, "I love him," they misunderstand, they misconstrue. When Paul says, "I love him," it's very much equivalent to me saying, "I love my dad." I am not in love with my dad, but I love my dad and I trust my dad. And I would challenge you at this point to tell me, what can you tell me about Paul's father? Yeah, he's not mentioned him. You can't tell me anything about Paul's father, but you could tell me that Kat's nose is crooked and that he's a cobbler by trade and that his masterpiece was a couple boxes of lobsters. You can tell me everything about Kat, and that shows you exactly what Paul thinks of him versus his own father. Paul tells you about the characters that mean the most to him, and he has said nothing about father, about mother, about any other siblings, about what they do for a living. He's told you none of that. So I challenge you to look at the end of this scene through that lens and with that knowledge. All right, that is Chapter 5. Chapter 6, they head to the battlefield for a 2-week offensive in which they will actually be challenging and charging across the field toward the enemy. It's pretty in-depth. So enjoy Chapter 5 as a moment of lightness and a moment of breathing before we head back into action tomorrow.